15 Most Nightmarish Female Serial Killers of All Time. Part 1.
If you are brand new to our channel, we invite you to take a moment to subscribe. Just click on the lit red button as well as the gray bell. Why the bell? Well, it will let you know every time we post a new video.
1. Gaetana Stimoli. Gaetana Stimoli, of Adriano, Sicily, was responsible for the murders of 23 children. She would lure children to her home with the promise of treats, after which point she would give them some wine with traces of undiluted phosphoric acids, which is incredibly lethal to the human body. The victims would then be sent on their way back home, but before they would get there, they would suffer excruciating bodily pain which led to an inevitable death. Stimoli had apparently lost 2 children of her own, believing their deaths to have stemmed from some sort of bewitchment. In order to achieve some form of karmic balance in her mind, Stimoli sought to take the lives of other children to avenge hers. This occurred in the late 19th century, when witchcraft was a somewhat prevalent belief in secluded communities. Indeed, when her home was eventually searched, authorities found all the stock and trade of witchcraft they needed to confirm her extensive crimes. 2. Katherine Knight. Known as the first Australian woman to be given a life imprisonment sentence without parole, Katherine Knight was responsible for the murder of her partner, John Price. As the dreaded tale goes, Knight stabbed the man to death, skinned him, and put his skin on a meat hook. She cooked his head and various other body parts, placed them alongside vegetables on plates next to place cards containing his children's names. Knight was planning to serve Price's cooked body parts to his children. She might have succeeded in doing so, if the police did not immediately apprehend her. The police found her knocked out on pills amid the horrific murder scene. During her trial, Knight eventually pleaded guilty to Price's murder, though she never directly acknowledged the crime. When shown footage of the murder, she reportedly grew hysterical and had to be sedated in court. She is currently serving out her sentence at the Silverwater Women's Correctional Centre in New South Wales. 3. Marianne Cotton. This serial killer seemed to have definitely been motivated by money, though that's surely not the final motive of her ghastly deeds. Marianne Cotton was confirmed to have been responsible for the deaths of 3 of her 4 husbands, although she is thought to have murdered 21 victims in all, which includes 11 of her 13 children as well as her own mother. Her main instrument of murder was arsenic poisoning, which caused great gastric pain and the accelerated decline of life force in her victims. After a 20-year-long spree of mysterious murders surrounding Cotton's life, she was eventually arrested and put on trial in 1873. Marianne Cotton was convicted of the murder of 3 of her husbands, and was sentenced to death by hanging. The execution was not a smooth one. Cotton's trapdoor proved to be too short, and she writhed wildly at the end of her rope until she eventually choked to death. 4. Myra Hindley. The despicable case of Myra Hindley describes the sexual assault and murders of 5 victims, ranging from the ages of 10 to 17. She partnered up with her equally malicious husband, Ian Brady, and together they abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered their young victims. In one case, they visited a playground and asked 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey to help them carry some packages to their home. When they got there, they stripped the young girl nude, took photos of her before full-on sexually assaulting and murdering her. The couple's spree was eventually put to a merciful halt. Their trial began in 1965, which was quite lucky for them, since capital punishment had been abolished in England just a few short weeks prior to their arrest. They were sentenced to life in prison. Myra Hindley died in 2002 of bronchial pneumonia, while Ian Brady is still alive, carrying out the remainder of his sentence. 5. Mary Bell. The case of Mary Bell is uniquely horrifying in the context of this list, since she committed her murders when she was just a child. In 1968, when she was 11 years old, Mary Bell strangled 2 little boys to death in Scotswood, a suburb of Newcastle upon Tyne, in England. The 2 boys were 4-year-old Martin Brown and 3-year-old Brian Howe. Although the murder of Brian Howe had been allegedly committed by Bell and an acquaintance named Norma Joyce Bell, no relation, Mary Bell was the only one tried for the murder, as court-appointed psychiatrists declared that she displayed classic symptoms of psychopathy. Bell was given an indefinite prison sentence and was released in 1980, at which point she was granted anonymity and the opportunity to start a new life. She would go on to have a daughter, who did not know about her mother's haunting past until reporters eventually discovered their location. 6. Magdalena Solis. Known simply as the High Priestess of Blood, serial killer Magdalena Solis was responsible for carrying out several murders during her membership of a long-dissolved Mexican cult. As per the cult's rituals, Solis would drink the victim's blood. In a nightmarish practice inspired from ancient Aztec mythology, Solis and her cult would brutally beat, burn, cut, and maim her victims, pouring their blood into a chalice mixed with chicken water. The cult, all the while under the influence of drugs like marijuana and peyote, would pass the chalice around in a joyous ritual as their victims lay bleeding to death. This process evolved from the relatively simple straightforward group murder scene, and it would eventually progress to the point that Solis and her cult would dissect their victims' hearts while they were still alive. Solis was eventually captured and sentenced to 50 years in prison, tried for only 2 of the murders she orchestrated. 7. Amelia Dyer. Amelia Dyer is another name on this list whose sheer alleged murder toll is almost too much for the mind to fathom. Despite being eventually hanged for a single murder, some sources put her total death count to be over 400. Apparently, all of those victims were babies. Dyer was initially trained as a nurse, but eventually opened up her home to receive mothers of illegitimately conceived children. For a substantial initial fee, Dyer would take the children from their unwilling mothers and assure them that she would provide care for the babies before finding them a safe, loving home. What she did, and of course, was the exact opposite. In her tamest violations, Dyer would let the children wither slowly from neglect and malnourishment. In other, incomprehensibly brutal cases, Dyer would wrap the infant's neck twice over with tape, and watch them pass horrifically away. Harold Shipman, with his 250 victims, is commonly known as Britain's worst serial killer, but amateur historians would do well to keep Amelia Dyer's cursed name in mind during the telling of their unfortunate tales. 8. Belle Gunness. As far as murder motives go, money is definitely the plainest of the bunch. However, as it turns out, sometimes people just kill for money and for the removal of potential evidence, and of course, this was the alleged case for Belle Gunness, who is said to have killed between 25 and 40 people throughout multiple decades during her lifetime, which lasted from 1859 to 1908. At a staggering 6 feet tall height and weighing in at over 200 pounds, Gunness possessed considerable physical strength, which surely assisted her in her brutal murders. She was known to post ads in local papers, asking for financially endowed men to come visit her for courtship. Here's how one of those ads went. Personal, comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided, with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered, unless sender is willing to follow answer with personal visit. Triflers need not apply. Of course, the vast majority of the men who came to visit Gunness were never seen again, and Gunness would make regular trips to the bank to deposit large checks. Gunness disappeared without a trace before she was ever tried for murder.